So, yes, we will continue. I will just pronounce Heikki like this in English, so you can also understand this, what I'm talking about. Yeah, we actually have two presentations about features and goings-ons of replication in parallel. On the upstairs, Oleg Tsarov is giving a more kind of comparison talk about comparison between MySQL replication and PostgreSQL replication, and why PostgreSQL replication is such an awesome thing. And Heikki here is going to go more in depth, in detail about the actual inner workings of PostgreSQL replication. How is it done right now? What kind of pitfalls, situations one might experience, and more importantly, what is being done in 9.5 to make it even better in the stably I guess, experience for all of us. Heikki, please.
Thank you. Great to be here again. So yeah, this is a funny presentation. This is I started writing this after having bumped into a few issues with Postgres replication that I only really realized in the last year or so. There are some issues. So it's funny that there's another presentation going on upstairs where they are hopefully telling you how great PostgreSQL replication is, because I'm down here telling you about all these issues we have. So let's get started. First of all, this presentation is all about the built-in tools we have in Postgres. Just the stuff that comes when you do like apt-get install, or if you get the source code and build it yourself. I'm only going to talk about that stuff. I'm not going to talk about Rep Manager, Wally. There are all kinds of really cool tools. Barman, I can't even name all of them, that will do backups for you, build a replication, all that stuff. And there's a lot of great monitoring tools to make sure that this all really works. You should be using all of that, but I'm not actually going to talk about that stuff today. That's not my expertise anyway. So, I'll split this presentation in a few parts. The first part is going to be just about continuous archiving. So how many here are running Postgres and you have a WAL archive set up? Yeah, plenty of people, great. So the first use case I'm going to talk about is just this very simple one where you have a single server and you just want to have a WAL archive of that. Maybe you want to do point-in-time recovery with it, or just if you ever want to run online backups, you need to have a WAL archive set up. So it's very simple. The way you do it, as you probably all know, if you have that set up, you set WAL level to archive, and you set archive mode to on, and then you put something in your archive command. Simple enough. But what do you actually put in your archive command? There is this blurb in the user manual which says, you can put whatever you want in your archive command. You can put an SCP command there to copy the WAL files to another server. Maybe you have an NFS mount, you can copy them there, or burn them on CDs or whatnot. I've never actually heard of anyone do that. Or if you're using something like Barman or Wally, they plug into the archive command, so you run that command as your archive command. And then the manual says there are two important things when you write your archive command. The first is that it should only return 0 if the archiving succeeded. That's simple enough. But it's an important point. If your SCP command fails or something, you must make sure that your shell script or the command returns a non-zero exit status, because the 0 to Postgres means that it succeeded, and Postgres is now free to delete that file because it's safely archived. So it's very important that you only tell Postgres it succeeded when it really did succeed. The other point the manual makes, it's not as strong worded, but it says that it should generally be designed to refuse to override any existing file, and that's a pretty good advice. If something goes wrong, especially if you have two servers and you somehow mix them up and accidentally archive into the same directory, these accidents happen. It's very nice if you don't overwrite anything, because you usually don't want to destroy evidence if you can avoid it. And then the manual goes on to have this example, and it has this disclaimer in there which says, this is an example, not a recommendation. which is good because we'll see that there are some problems with this. Not just the one that the manual mentions, which is that it might not work on all platforms. So problem number one, there is no fsync in that example. It means that when that command returns, the file might not have actually been flushed to disk yet. So you return success, but if you then immediately crash or you pull the power plug, the file might not actually be there yet. It might not have hit the disk yet. But Postgres might already have deleted the file and now it's lost forever. So yeah, that's problem number one with that example in particular. There's no flush to disk there. Problem number two, remember when I said that you should not overwrite an existing file? Well, it turns out that there are actually this scenario where if you run Postgres runs the archive command and it has completed the SCP command or copied it to the NFS file, but just before it returns success, you crash, or Postgres crashes. And that's okay. I mean, you haven't really lost anything because Postgres has this has the while log and it will, do crash recovery. But after it has done crash recovery, it's going to try to archive the same file again because it doesn't know that it succeeded already. So now you have a problem because now Postgres will try to archive the same file again, and you just wrote your script in a way that it refuses to do that. So it will error out, and when it starts to error out, it's never going to make any progress, and you will just accumulate these WAL files forever until you go and delete something or you fix your script to handle that. So that's another problem. These are probably very rare issues because I haven't heard anyone complaining about these two things, but they're real. And there are a lot of people doing exactly that. So it probably doesn't happen very often in practice, but it's something to keep in mind when you administer these systems that you might actually have this problem. So how do you actually write an archive command that works? There are 3 points. There's you only return 0 on success, as the manual says. That's correct advice. And you should also do an fsync, or depending on what your command is, maybe you don't need to. Maybe you trust the server USCP too, so you don't care about, or you're not worried that it might ever lose power. Or maybe it's if you're burning to a CD, then you won't do an fsync on top of that. But anyway, you have to really make sure that it has really made it to disk, whatever that command is. I don't know if Barman and PG Backrest and all these other tools that are out there, I haven't actually checked if they, how many of them get this right. But that would be an interesting survey to go through and make sure that they actually do that. I'm sure some of them do, but I'm also pretty sure not all of them. But the third point is that you should actually write your command in a way that if the file already exists, I would advise that you check if the content is identical to the new file. And if it is, then it's probably okay. You're not losing anything by just ignoring it then, or just copy it over because it's the exact same file. Just those shell commands to do that. It's like cmp or diff or something you can run if you're writing your shell script. That's easy enough. So check if the file is identical and only return success if it is. So, oops. Yeah. So that was the part one of my presentation. I was pretty shocked when I realized that the advice we give in the manual is actually incomplete. Part two. This is a new feature. So the stuff I talked about previously, that was old and nothing has changed in 9.5. But this is a new feature in 9.5. Fuji Masao wrote the original patch a long time ago, and I picked it up and committed it later. So the scenario is, the feature is that in 9.5, there's a third option to archive mode. Previously you could say to off or on, but now there's a third option, which is always. It's even more on than on. It means that it's going to archive the file also when it's running in standby mode. In the master, it's exactly the same as on. There's no difference there. But normally when you run archive mode on in a standby, it won't do anything on the standby. It will only start to do the archiving after you promote the server. With the archive mode on, it's also going to archive everything while it's running in standby mode. And the scenario where this is useful is if you have this thing, you have a master and a standby, and you want to maintain a separate while archive for both of the servers. So you have one archive for the master and another archive for the standby. It might be useful if they're in different data centers, for example, or something. So that's new in 9.5, pretty simple feature. Just lets you do this, which wasn't really easy before. So yeah, that's what it does. But I'm also going to go through, there's another scenario where it might be useful, even if you're not having a separate while archive. I'm going to get into that. So part 3 of my presentation is how do you, if you want to do this, how many of you are running this scenario? Oh, there's a few, okay. So you have a master and a standby, and you have a while archive, and it's kind of shared between the master and the standby. You both of the servers, you want them to be archiving to the same location. Well, it might not be the exact same directory, but anyway, they're like the same server. You don't want to keep a whole copy of all the archives in both of them. This is very common, and it's actually a bit tricky to set up, and I think a lot of people are doing this wrong and not realize it, because I didn't realize that the simple way to do that doesn't actually work. And the simple way to do this, which doesn't actually work, is just set archive mode on, and just put the same archive command on both of your servers, like SCP to a common server, and that's it. How many of you are doing that? Okay, you're the only one to confess now after I said that it doesn't actually work. I mean, that's how I would have done it, but it's not actually enough to make it safe, because there's a problem. So let's look at what happens when you do failover. Because that's why you had a standby in the first place. You want to be able to do failover if your master dies. So let's assume that your master dies for whatever reason. It gets hit by a meteor, or you just lose power, or anything happens. You will go to the standby and you will type in pgctl promote, or maybe you have one of these like fancy monitoring tools I said I'm not going to talk about that will do that for you. Anyway, you promote the standby, and what's going to happen next? What will happen is that the standby, first of all, before it does anything else, it's going to replay, let's see which way around it goes. It's going to replay all the while it already had streamed to the standby server, because there might be like a few megabytes or even more while that it has already copied, but it has not applied the logs yet. So it's first it's going to apply all of that it can. Next, it's going to disconnect if it was still connected to the master. If the master was actually hit by a meteor, that's going to disconnect it. But if you promote it and it's still running for whatever reason, maybe it was hung or whatever, it might still be running. Anyway, it's going to disconnect if it was still connected. Then what it's going to do, it's going to create what we call a timeline. A new timeline, and then it's going to copy the last while file it had streamed up to the point where it was, because it's, it hasn't completely filled it up yet. It might be in the middle of the file replaying the changes when this thing happens. So it's going to copy it up to the point where it was, then it's going to start a new timeline there, and it's going to continue writing from that point on. And then it's going to start archiving on the new timeline. So this is what, if you look at the pgxlog directory on the master and the standby, that's what it's going to look like, and the while archive. So remember that you have streaming replication going from master to the standby, and you also have archiving going from master to the while archive. So this is streaming, goes through streaming replication, and this is going through the archive commands to the while archive. Okay. So what happens is that, first of all, the archive it's always going to lag behind a little bit, because we only send the file to the archive when it's full. So there's always going to be a small delay there. But the streaming replication should be pretty much instant. There might be a delay there as well, but it's usually, it's not much. For the purposes of this presentation, let's assume that there is no delay there. So you have this partial segment that the master was, halfway full here, and it's also halfway copied to here, and now you do the promotion. So what happens when you do the promotion? The standby creates this other file. It's exactly the same as the one it was writing to, but it changes the timeline ID from 1 to 2 here. And then it archives this file to the while archive, and then it continues creating these files on the second timeline. Now, the little point to note here is that this file it archives, it's not the complete segment yet, because it was in the middle of this file, and that's a bit nasty. So normally we only archive the file when it's full, but in this particular scenario, when you do a promotion, we get this one file in here that is not actually completed. It's only written up to half of it, or it can stop at any point, depending on where the crash or the promotion happened. And that's a bit nasty. If you then, for some reason, if the master didn't actually die, if it's still running somewhere, it might later go and try to archive the same file. So you have this file that's half garbage, half valid data in the archive. That's a bit nasty. As I said, there's two problems with it. First of all is the master is actually still running. It's later going to fill the segment when it is actually complete, and then it's going to try to archive it. And now you have this scenario again where the file already exists in the archive because the standby put it there, the incomplete one. And now the master tries to archive the complete one. Now you have a little bit of a problem. You're probably, that archiving the complete segment is not going to work if you wrote your script in a way if it refuses to overwrite the whole file. So the other problem, it might also happen the other way around. Maybe the standby was lagging behind a little bit and the master had already actually archived that file. And in that scenario, the standby will fail to archive that, and it's going to continue to fail, and it's never going to get past that problem unless you do something manually. So that's not good. It's not nice to have these incomplete files in your while archive. If you see a file there, you want to know that it's actually complete. So in 9.5, I changed this so that we changed the name of the file so that we put a .partial in there. Now you can actually tell which file is the complete one and which one is the partial one. And maybe you might even keep multiple copies of these partial ones if that ever happens, if you really want to make a fancy archive command. But in most cases, you don't really need to. So what happens now in 9.5 is that we get this, the standby renames this latest file it was writing to or copying to .partial, and then gets copied under that name. And now you can actually tell from the while archive which is great. So yeah. So the second problem we have with this whole setup is that these two files are actually missing from the archive. What happened here? If the master had not archived segments 15 and 16 yet, but they were already streamed to the standby, and then the standby starts archiving here, and the master crashed here, you have a gap here. You're missing segments 15 and 16, and that's bad. That's the whole point of archiving, is that you make sure that you don't miss any files, and now you do. So after that happens, you can't, do point-in-time recovery with this archive anymore. You won't get past that gap. So yeah, everyone who's running this setup, you probably have this problem. So what do you do? I mentioned this archive command always earlier, which makes sure that everything gets archived, both in the master and the standby. You can use that to work around this problem. You can, because now the standby can also try to archive the same files. Originally, back in the spring, I was writing a patch that would have an archive mode shared, where you can only try to archive it if it's not there. But it was pretty complicated, and in the end I just ran out of time for 9.5, and I also realized that you can just use the archive mode always to work around this. So the way to do this with archive mode always is that you have the same archive command in master and standby, but now if you point them to the same server, you will have both the master and the standby will always try to archive the same file, so you will have to be prepared for that the archive command might be running in both servers at the same time. It gets a lot more tricky to write your command safely if you have to be prepared for race conditions. One of the commands opens the file first and then the other one tries to override it, and all kinds of messy situations. But you can do that, and that's the way to do it without having the gaps. It's a bit nasty. Probably easier than try to write to the same location is to actually have like 2 directories in the same server and have the master archive to the one directory and the standby to the other directory. Yeah, you get 2 copies of every file, but you can then go and delete the duplicates later. Write a little script for that. It's pretty simple to do. Yeah, so this is my summary of this part. If you want to set up a shared archive between the master and the standby, you have to write your archive command so that it's concurrency safe. It must handle duplicates correctly. If you ever see these .partial files appear, that's okay. You don't get them with earlier versions. In 9.5 you will when you promote. You don't need to care about them. You can just leave them. And you still have got to make sure that you have an fsync in your archive command. So, part 4 of my presentation is a tool called PGReceiveXlog. This is not new. This is first introduced in 9.2, but it has gotten better in every release. This is a better way of doing like the shared archive thing I talked about. It's different from the archive command in that this is an application that you launch and you leave it running. It's like a daemon. It connects to the streaming. It connects to the master with streaming replication. Let's see if I have it. Yeah. So the way PGReceiveLog works is that so the arrows here is the direction of the data flow, but it's the PGReceiveXlog that connects to the master and then starts streaming. And if your master dies for whatever reason, then it's gonna, you can configure it so that you can then try to connect to the standby instead. And this is a lot more reliable way to do this shared archive thing. So another nice thing about the PGReceiveXlog compared to the archive command is that this, because it uses the streaming replication, it doesn't work. Everything gets archived in real time. You don't have to wait for the whole archive, the whole file to fill up before it gets archived. It gets archived all the time. So it should be as up to date as a standby server. So you can think of it like it's like a standby server, but only for the purpose of maintaining a raw archive. That makes sense. By the way, if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask at any time. Should have time at the end too. So this was added in 9.2. It was a bit incomplete in 9.2 because it couldn't actually follow the timeline change in 9.2, which means that if you did a promotion, it would just stop working and you had to reinitialize it. So it didn't really work for this scenario in 9.2. But in 9.3, it was modified to follow the timeline changes, which means that if you connect it to the standby server, it will notice that, hey, there was a new timeline, and it will fetch everything it needs to get a complete archive. In 9.4, we added support for these replication slots. So before 9.4, you had to set the while keep segments setting to a high enough value and hope that it worked. So the problem is that before 9.4, there was no way to ensure that the server doesn't delete the files before they're archived. So it might be that if it falls behind for any reason, you might the server might already delete the files before they get archived. But that was fixed with the replication slots in 9.4. Now you can create a replication slot in the server, and the server will make sure that it doesn't delete the file until the receive xlog command has acknowledged that it has the file safely on disk. And PC receive xlog will also fsync the files, by the way, in a safe way before it replies that it's got it. In 9.5, we added another command, well, that's synchronous. In the synchronous mode, it works like a synchronous replication standby in that it will fsync after every commit or after every flush, and it will tell the server its position. It basically means that you can, if you set up, if you turn on synchronous replication in the server, in the master server, you can use PC receive xlog as the synchronous standby to make it respond to the client. But the big changes was really in 9.4, where we got the replication slot support that made it reliable. So this is how you set up PC receive xlog. You have to once run it with the create create slot option, or I think there are other ways to create those slots, but that's the easiest one. And what confused me is when you do this, it will immediately start running, and it won't only create the slot, it will also start running, and it will keep running until you hit Ctrl+C to break it. I was a little bit confused by that at first. But after you created the slot, you only do that once, and then you hit Ctrl+C. And then you actually launch it with just the leave out the create slot command, and it's going to continue running. Keep running, and it's going to keep copying the files. You can look at the directory, the while archive directory you specified here, and you will see the files to appear as they get streamed. Like this. There's a -verbose option. It will print a line after every file, which is handy to see that if it's working, especially when you're setting it up. In this case, you can see that it started streaming at this position. When it completes a segment, and all of segments. And what happens here is that I shut down the master, and I promoted the standby, so you can see that PC receive xlog also creates a .partial file. This is actually what I used as an example for when I did the change for the archive command. PC receive xlog has always created these .partial files, and now the backend will also do that. Anyway, it will live behind this .partial file, and then you can see that it switched to the next timeline because the standby was promoted, and it's going to continue streaming from that point on. So my advice for setting up a shared archive, forget about what I said earlier. don't try to do that. You should actually be using PC receive xlog. That's a lot easier to set up. Now, of course, there are scenarios where you can't do that. Maybe you wanna, if you can't run PC receive xlog on the while archive server, maybe it's not a server you can run stuff on. Maybe you want to archive into some cloud provider thingy, then you will be running your PC receive xlog there. Yes?
What about the symbol in
Yeah, so the question was, does PC receive xlog do fsyncs? Yes, it does. Yeah. It will fsync. I think it fsyncs the file whenever it gets completed, if I remember correctly. So yeah, it should be correct in that way. Anyway, there might be scenarios where you can't use PC receive xlog, but usually you should be able to. If you can, you should use it. So the last part I'm going to talk about is a tool called PC Rewind. Time it? Yeah, I have time. PC Rewind, this is new in 9.5. It solves the failback problem. So First of all, this is a tool I originally wrote for 9.3 or 9.4. I think I started working on this when I was working for VMware. This was a problem for them as well as everyone else in that you can't easily do failback with Postgres. Anyway, this required a lot of changes to the WAL format. As you might know, in 9.5 there is a big changes to the internal WAL format. There is now good information on what blocks have each WAL record has changed and so forth. I spent a lot of time working on that because that was a prerequisite to get PG Rewind to work reliably and to make it maintainable. The problem PG Rewind tries to solve is the failbacks. So let's see if I have a, yeah. So the way it works, when you have a timeline, so if you have a master server running, and you have one insert transaction, for example, here, and you do another insert transaction here, it's all on a single timeline. When you promote your standby server, it's going to create another timeline, and now it's the standby creating the WAL here, and you have a transaction here, and the master stops working for some reason. You have the situation where you have something here that was not copied to the standby, but it happened in the master, and that's a problem if you ever want to do failback. Because when you promoted your standby server, there was this one insert or whatever transaction it is, or it doesn't even have to be a complete transaction, just any WAL logged operation. You have these transactions here that were not copied to the standby, and because of that, we have a problem with failback. So once your master crashes, you fail over to the standby, and now you want to rebuild your old master to be a standby that streams in the other direction, and that's complicated. Previously, what we have had to tell people is that, yeah, you can't actually make use of your old master, you just have to throw it away and take a new base backup from your new master and reinitialize it from scratch. That's pretty bad. I mean, you can't really reliably do automated failovers if failing back is so complicated that you have to rebuild it from scratch, especially if you have a lot of data, so that's been a problem. First of all, if you have a lot of data, it takes a long time and it's just a lot of work. You can use rsync to speed it up because you still have that old master data directory that is almost the same as the new master, and rsync is good at speeding that kind of things up where you only have little differences. But there are some problems with that. First of all, you have to be careful which rsync options you use so that it's safe. I think by default the rsync looks at the timestamps, and that's really not good enough for Postgres, I believe. You need to make sure that it uses only the CRC to determine what has changed. So the first problem with rsync is that you have to be careful and know what you're doing, that you use the right options so that it is actually safe. The second problem is that it's still going to be pretty slow because it still needs to read through all of the data in both servers so that it can know what has changed. So if you have 10 terabytes of data, it still needs to read through 10 terabytes of data in both servers, only to copy like maybe a few megabytes. It's going to save on network traffic, but it's still going to be slow. So PG Rewind is a solution to that. The way to think about PG Rewind is that it is exactly like rsync, except that instead of scanning through the files and calculating these checksums like rsync does, PG Rewind looks at the transaction log to see what has changed. Because all the information is there. That's what we have the WAL log for. It records everything that has changed. So why not use that? So that's exactly what PG Rewind will do. It will scan the WAL on the new master to determine which blocks have changed, and then it only copies those blocks over. Now, there are a lot of things in the data directory that are not WAL logged. For example, configuration files. There's all kinds of different little files that Postgres uses internally. There's also things like the free space maps for every relation, and the visibility map PG-Rewind doesn't handle currently. So everything else that it doesn't recognize, it just copies over it completely. Because that's always safe, as I said. The usual way to do this is to just make a full copy of your server, okay? So we can always fall back to that. If there's anything the PG-Rewind doesn't know how to handle, it doesn't have any special case for it, it just copies it over completely. So the end result is exactly the same as if you had run rsync or just copied the the old new master over to the new master. It will, if there were any files in or configuration files or anything that you don't want to copy over, you should back up those first and then put the back after you run with PG-Rewind. That's really all I have. I hope you have all the questions. Yes.
Hello. My question is about PG receive X log. Does this command have any kind of hooks or parameters with commands which I can call when it finished one wall segment?
Right. No. It's open source, you can hack it if you want. Yeah, that's not a good answer. Yeah, that might be useful. I've never thought of that. You could scan the file system, call the file system to wait for new files to appear. There's probably libraries you can do that effectively. But no, there is nothing. Would you like to do like for monitoring purposes or?
Just another archiving.
For another archive, yeah. Others? Yes.
I repeat my question about the thing on doc from PostgreSQL doc. Say nothing about the thing, only about the synchronous mode.
Yep. So,
and Michel Paquet blog where he said about in seconds.
yeah, so there was a patch in 9.5. Let's see if I get this right. There was a patch in 9.5 during the release cycle that added an option to PG receive xlog. That was like fsync interval or something like that. It was a command that made PG receive xlog to fsync automatically every 5 seconds or whatever number you put there. But it was ripped out before the release because it didn't really feel very useful, to be honest. Instead, what we have now is the synchronous option, which says that whenever you're running with the synchronous option, it will fsync after, I think it's after every time it receives something, it will flush it to disk, fsync. Yeah, if I remember correctly. Whenever it receives something from the server, it will write it to disk, then it will fsync it, and then it will return, or acknowledge it to the server, so that the server will then, it can acknowledge the commit to the client. That's a lot more useful than the interval command was. So yeah, we have that now, but it will fsync stuff.
Can I make one stupid comment?
Yeah, sure.
Did you notice he pronounced the name in French?
Oh no. Okay.
Michel Paquet.
Oh, Michel. Yeah.
Would you repeat the question?
So the
Give me the question.
yeah. So I was just pointing out that he pronounced Michel Paquet correctly as French. Because it is a French name.
My name is Michel.
Oh. Okay. I think it's actually Michael Paquet. But anyway. Michael Paquet is born in France. Well, yeah, he's French, but he lives in Japan. Okay, I guess so. I don't speak French. Okay, good. Yes.
Hi. It's still required data checksums when we make any DB, or hints for make rewind workable?
Yeah, yeah, that's yeah. So you need to set to use PG rewind. You have to set you either have to DB with checksums enabled, or you have to set in the config file you have to set the while log hints option to on. Whichever, it doesn't matter. If you use checksums, then you don't need to set the other option. If you don't use checksums, then you have to set the other option. You can still set the other option even though you use checksums, but then it just won't do anything. Oh, what's the overhead? So the overhead with the while log hints setting is about the same as with checksums. It will generate some more while logs whenever you do hint bits, the same as checksums. It won't actually calculate the checksums though, so it's somewhat cheaper, I guess. I can't put a number on that. It depends entirely on the workload. But people have been running with checksums, and I haven't actually heard anyone complaining about it in practice. And we worried a lot about that overhead when the checksums feature was put in, but I haven't actually heard anyone complain.
What is your take on full page writes? So should it be on or off for a really good warm standby?
It should always be on. I don't see any scenario where you... In theory, there are file systems, there are systems where you could turn it off and get away with it, but how would you even know? How do you know if it's safe? That's a difficult question. I would never even bother trying to turn it off. Also, even from a performance point of view, there is actually a benefit to turning it on, because when you do while replay, the replay is faster when you have full page writes on, because then it doesn't need to, whenever you replay the record from the while log, it's just going to take the copy from the while log and write it out to disk. Take it from the while log and write it out to disk. And if you have these full page writes, you don't need to read the old version from disk first, modify it and write it out. So it was actually, and that went in a long time ago, like 8 point something, that we optimized that away so that you don't do the unnecessary read. And it made a huge difference to the speed of while replay. So if you think that you can get some performance benefit from turning off full page writes, yeah, maybe you can, but it will also hurt your while replay performance. So I wouldn't bother with ever even trying that.
So my main concern was the volume of generated wall files. Not taking into account the wall replay, that's very true, but the thing is, well, wall uses a sync write to write data to disk.
Yes.
What actual problems can appear if we just disable these full page writes and write as usual?
So the question is what problem you can have if you turn off full page writes. The problem is known as the torn page problem. It basically means that if you crash, you might have a corrupt database. Simply. On a normal system, it's just not safe to turn it off, because you might have half of a page and from one version, and another half of the page would be old, not written to disk yet. So full page writes, you have to turn it on to be reliable. And also, actually, PG rewind won't work at all if you try to turn it off. It will just give you an error message.
Why there is such an option?
So why does the option exist? So when that was originally put in, I think that people thought that there are file systems where it is actually safe to turn it off. And yeah, there probably are. If you have a file system that never writes only half a block, then that would be safe. Andres?
It's also good if you never ever recover from a crashed database server. So if you always fail over, then it's safe to use full page writes off, because you don't ever do crash recovery. So if you immediately scrap the server after a crash, then you're fine. That's the only situation where I can see it actually being useful. Yeah, no, you have to set the server restart to default.
Okay, I guess that's something. Yeah.
So earlier you mentioned from the list of stuff you need to do for a safe archive command. I think you missed that we also you always should write to temporary file, fsync and then rename. because otherwise you'll get different files because you only partially wrote if your archive command crashed in between, and then you will retry and you will get a failure which is completely spurious.
Yeah, so the example command in the manual has that problem too. Yeah, you have to make put the file into the archive atomic, like you said, write it to a temporary file. I guess you have to fsync it then and rename and fsync again.
Yes.
Yeah, so again, don't try to write your own archive command, you will get it wrong. And even if you get it right, it's all the work.
So when you have the archive equal always, do you write the wall files from the standby all the time, or just after you in the process of being promoted?
All the time.
And why is that versus just when it's being promoted?
Because that's how it works. I mean, yeah, back in spring I had this patch that would only do it at promotion, and it would actually keep track. The master would tell the server, the standby, how far it has already archived, and then the standby would only try to archive the files that it's not sure about. Or you could do it, you could implement it in some other ways, but the way it is now, it always tries to archive.
You said that with rewind you not only copy the missing data, but also some configuration files. Could it be that there are some corrupted configuration files, for example, which you just copied to promote the new master, which also fails?
Yeah. So the PC rewind will copy over the old master, and that's the one it's going to scrap. And the new master, presumably that's okay. If that's also failing, or you have a problem there, then you don't want to fail back, I think. Or maybe you would want to, but then you would want to continue from the old position and not. Yeah. So if you have a corrupt new master and you do PC rewind on that, yeah, the corruption will also propagate. So don't do that. That's one thing that scares me when people write these scripts that do automated promotions and failovers and failbacks, because if something goes wrong, how sure can you be that what went wrong? Maybe there can be a million ways that something can fail, and if you don't actually go and look, how do you correct? How does a script correctly determine, what's the best answer to that?
The same way as you do.
Yeah, just try something and hope it works. But yeah, I can see that. Of course, there are scenarios where you kind of have to try. But usually, I would not, if you can avoid it, I would not try to do automated failover or automated failback. It's easy to get it wrong. Others, we have time.
What about doing archive command only from standby? Not master, only from standby. I'm a master true command on archive, but on standby, copy to archive.
Yeah, you could do that. You could set, you could even turn off, you could even do archive mode off in the master and only turn it on. Turn it to always in the standby, and then what will happen is that it's only the standby that does the archiving. Yeah, you could do that.
In that case, standby would be always ahead of archive.
Yes, that's true. Then the standby would always be ahead. That might be a sensible configuration, and it would also address what Bruce mentioned, is that if you don't want both of them to be doing the archiving, that would be one way to do it. Make it so that it's only the standby that does the archiving. Then, of course, you have to be, if the standby stops working, then you won't have to archive either. So it probably makes sense to have both of them do the archiving and archive to a different location, and then deduplicate the files later. Maybe you have a Cronus job or something that deletes the duplicates. It's the safest option, probably.
one question about binary complete or binary difference between these files. Is they identical? Are they equal? Are they must be equal when you make archiving from master?
You mean the WAL files? Did they have to be
Yep.
equal? I'm not sure what you mean. They would be equal.
I mean, might they be? How can I deduplicate them if they are different?
Oh, okay. They won't be. They would be the same. If they are different, then something has gone wrong, and raise an alert or investigate. If it has the same file name, it should be equal. Unless it crashed in the middle of the write and you didn't do this temporary file rename dance, then you might have these scenarios, but they should be equal. That was another point with the partial files I mentioned earlier, because that was kind of nasty. In that, before 9.5, you might have these partial segments archived that look exactly like a regular complete segment, but it's not. And in that scenario, you might have two copies with the same file name, one that is filled only halfway through and one that is complete. And they would, you wouldn't know just by looking at the file name, you couldn't tell which is which. But now in 9.5, the partial one will have the .partial suffix, so you know.
I already asked you yesterday about a situation when we open standby for writes and next need to turn back in replication. Yes, and I have one idea here. Maybe it will be good if we will make to do that for a next purpose. We open standby for writes, just disable replication, and open it for writes and make some tests on this machine. Maybe write workloads, maybe integration tests, and when we want to turn back to replication, we may run pgrewind. And now pgrewind will not work, as you say yesterday to me.
Yeah, we talked about the scenario. So currently pgrewind, it's, when I wrote it, I tried to be very conservative, so that if it finds, first of all, it tries to do some checks before it modifies anything. It will look at the control files, it will read the WAL before it modifies anything, and if it finds anything funny that it doesn't know how to deal with, or anything unexpected, it will give you an error and not modify the data directory. So when I wrote it, it has to know, it has to parse the timeline so it knows which order they forked from each other. And the scenario that you mentioned, the scenario is that it's different from a failback. What you actually want, what you would want to do is to just rewind the standby on the same timeline, backwards in time. And in theory, it should be possible to do that, but it doesn't. I don't think it does currently, because it will look at the timeline history files and it will, think that you're trying to do something funny. Basically, it's not prepared that the timelines are in the different order, in that order. But yeah, that would be nice to implement. It should, in theory, be possible to use it for that. To really, you would think from the name of the command that it could actually do that, just to rewind on the same timeline. That would be cool. Yeah. It does require that you have something to rewind. Anyway, yeah, it would be nice to do.
About .partial file. Recovery process replay that file or ignore it.
So replay will ignore it. If you really, in normal circumstances, you should never need the .partial file, because when the backend creates a .partial file, it will at the same time make a copy of the file under the new timeline, and it has the same contents. Yeah, it has the same beginning. And after the point where the promotion happened, it will have the stuff, it will have the while on the new timeline. But the first half of the file will be identical to the .parcel file. So that's why the server doesn't normally need the .parcel files in the first place.
At next timeline, file with same LSN name contains partial data. Is it correct? Partial file, partial file, contained by same file at next timeline.
Yes. Yeah. So if you have, let's go back. If you have a file here, let's see. Here we go. So this is what happens when you do a promotion. The standby will create this .parcel file. It's actually the same file we had in the master, but it's going to rename it. And then it creates the file with the same the different timeline ID, but the same number here. So it's like up to the point where the promotion happened, the contents between these two files will be identical. So the first half of this file will actually be from the previous timeline. Yeah, so I guess the question is, why do we bother with partial files at all? Initially, I actually suggested that we should just not, do that, just leave them out, and at least not archive them. But there were people who felt that, it's nice just in case something goes wrong. Again, it's kind of nice to have it in the archive if you happen to need it. You shouldn't normally need it. If you ever happen to need it for some reason we can't think of now, you can always take out the .parcel suffix and just copy it into ptx log, and the server will find it. But you shouldn't need it. Kind of the only scenario I can think of is that if you now, immediately after you promote it, before this second file in the second timeline fills up and gets archived, so before you have this file in the archive, you crash again, and you lose the standby as well. Yeah, so two meteors, two meteors are sitting at the same, well, roughly at the same time. Then you could use the .parcel file to replay after that point where you promoted. But, it shouldn't really happen.